Welcome, everybody, to the Friday wrap-up show. What we're going to try to do here, and by we, it's the royal we here. It's just me, Kevin Cole, your host, proprietor of the Unexpected Points Substack newsletter and podcast here. So what we're going to try to do is use this Friday show, this solo Friday show, as an exclusive to the paid subscribers at unexpectedpoints.substack.com. But there is a little bit of a loophole here in that I'm going to stream this live to YouTube. I may take some questions from there. I think I have enough questions that I got via comments in different posts mostly from paid subscribers, because they're mostly paid posts. I think one of the comments is from a free post that I did on Russell Wilson that I may talk about slightly in this. But to get a little extra benefit for the paid subscribers there, where if you can't speak to me directly, if you leave comments in the Substack post when I post this podcast, which again will go out to paid subscribers, I will answer those on the following week's podcast. I was going to do this the last couple of Fridays, but I was out of town down in Orlando, Florida. I know, hard life for me, while some of you guys were freezing your tushes off a couple weeks ago. I was down there in frigid 35-degree weather in Orlando, playing a lot of pickleball, hanging out with the kids, and also getting up those posts, at least 5 posts a week. And did not do the podcasting, though, when I was down there. It's just not a good setup. It's not a good studio. I don't have everything set up there. But I did come back at you with an interview with Ted Knutson, the CEO and founder of StatsBomb, this week. I'm going to talk about what he said, one part of what he said, and then because it sparked a conversation amongst commenters on that particular post. So we're going to talk about that as part of this here. But I'm also going to do a weekly wrap-up of the things. One thing I haven't decided is whether or not I want to release a free preview to the free but non-paying subscribers of the podcast. I don't know. Is it going to get anyone to convert? I'm not quite sure if this is enough to get someone to convert, but I do think it's a good thing, again, to establish that relationship if you've been able to post questions directly to me. Now, if you are watching on YouTube, and I see there are some viewers here, not a lot, some viewers here on YouTube. I don't have a ton of subscribers to my new YouTube channel here. If you want to post a comment on this, put Q&A at the beginning of the comment, and I'll realize that that's a Q&A that I can eventually get to once I go through the 5, 6, 7 questions that I already have vetted and set up here to talk about. But before we get to the Q&A, first off, I just posted something on Twitter about Pat Kerrane, a joke about how he's going to come into the NBC Sports Edge offices and quit Chappelle Show style. There's a Chappelle Show episode where he gets Oprah pregnant, and because of that, he's like, "I'm set now for life because now I'm Oprah's baby daddy, and I'll be set for life there." So he goes into the offices of Chappelle Show and he says, "I quit," and tells everyone to kiss his ass, this and that. So I posted that on Twitter saying that's what Pat Kerrane. Those who don't know Pat Kerrane, he works over at NBC Sports Edge with the guys there. Great guy. Been involved heavily in the best ball streets. Heavily in the high stakes, I guess you could call them, leagues that are out there in different forms. Ship Chasing was the show that he had on there. He talk about shipping something. Talk about adding a chip to your resume here. He won the Underdog Fantasy, I believe it was the Best Ball Mania 3 tournament. $10 million in total prize money for this tournament. $2 million to number one. I'll repeat that. $2 million. This is a best ball tournament done in the offseason. I believe it's a $25 entry for everyone going into this. So they had about 451,000 entries filling this tournament, $25 a piece, I believe. And again, $2 million to Pat Kerrane. Now, one thing I'll mention about Pat, and I don't think he'll mind me putting this highly sensitive and confidential information out there. Pat Kerrane is a subscriber to Unexpected Points, the Unexpected Points newsletter. One of the first subscribers there. I shoot DMs with him all the time. He likes the adjusted scores. We talked about that a lot. He's a subscriber here. So is it coincidence that Pat Kerrane subscribed to Unexpected Points a few weeks ago and now he is a multimillionaire? I don't know. Yes, he drafted the team months and months ago. It had nothing to do with any knowledge that he gained from being a subscriber. But hey, you got to look at the cosmic influence of these sorts of things here. And what's especially, talk about cosmic influence, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit in regards to playoff seeding and other things that have come on the heels of the canceled Bengals Bills game. And prayers up, thumbs up. Damar Hamlin, sounds like things are going very, very well for him there. People have had a similar sort of condition in the past when they have received direct, successful medical intervention on the field like Hamlin did here. Some people are back playing. Multiple people are back playing after having heart attacks on the pitch sometimes when it comes to soccer, but also as a hockey player who had a very similar thing happened and was back to playing a few weeks later. I don't know if or a month or two later. I don't know if Hamlin will be one of those people that eventually ends up playing here, but much success to him. But because of what happened there and this game being canceled, I don't know if Pat Kerrane wins this thing. Pat Kerrane was in first place going into Monday night, but he posted his lineup. I don't think he had anyone playing on Monday night. So there were at least half a dozen to a dozen other teams who could have overtaken him if that Monday night game was played. So, whew, a lot of luck out here. That is a lot of luck, a lot of variance generally in sport, and I guess also in sport-derived contests here, like the Best Ball Mania 3. Props to Pat Kerrane, though. Again, I got to get Pat Kerrane, founding member. You need to be a founding member of this newsletter now. You got the money to throw around to do so, not just be a regular member. But when I go into luck here, I want to talk a little bit about luck here. Did the NFL Galaxy brain this whole agreement? I thought they might even push forward with trying to play the game last week. It seemed like that would be a PR disaster to have done that, so they decided not to do it. I started it last week, but going earlier this week before we get to Sunday, probably would have been a PR disaster. Kind of understand why they didn't do it from that standpoint. But one thing that's really interesting in this was, when Damar Hamlin woke up, one of the first things he asked the doctors, and there was this, somewhat eye rollish sort of cheesy line about the doctor saying you won the game of life afterwards. But he asked them specifically, did we win the game? And what's interesting about this is that is the NFL protocol. Remember, this is a freak thing that has never happened before on an NFL field. I can talk more about, I did some research into, I think I want to get the pronunciation correctly. I think it's like commotio cordis or whatever you call the likely cause of his heart attack. It's actually not really an NFL thing. It's more of a round ball or object hits you in the chest, causing at a very inopportune exact timing moment is normally when it happens. It's not a football thing. It can happen in football. It's an 8 to 18-year-old thing. So it's younger people most of the time. So you don't see it with older people that often because they have higher developed rib and chest capacity to kind of to blunt the impact. And it's most often from baseballs, hockey pucks, lacrosse balls. There's been multiple people who have died from this condition because if you don't have the equipment to shock back your heart rhythm back into place, it's a very low survival impact. So this is really not a football thing. What ended up happening in this, and that's why Hamlin was wondering, hey, do we play the game? Because there have been guys. Think about God, the name escapes me now. I think his last name was Utley, who was a Detroit Lions offensive lineman. Dude was paralyzed on the NFL field. I know that happens sometimes where we don't know whether guys have feelings or not in their extremities. They're put on the cart, they're taken off on the ambulance, and people just go ahead and play again. That's pretty much the protocol for any injury in the NFL is you cart them up, you load them up, You drive them off, and then you give the 5-minute warning that became this big thing with the NFL forcing them to play. Presumably, and maybe I give too much credit to the NFL and others for. Well, actually, I shouldn't say too much credit. I'm not going to be assuming the worst about them. I just assume that the referees thought this is the protocol, and we're going forward with the protocol, whether the NFL was trying to force them to play or not. But Hamlin thought that they would have played the game. But his initial reaction to it, that's kind of how things work. So this is just an extreme outcome, the fact that this game wasn't played. I also did some more research to figure out, when has this ever happened before? And this feeds in a little bit to the reading assignment, which unfortunately, I know I had the book club thing set up, the Perfect Pass. Maybe I'll talk about that a little, but there is a great second chapter in the Perfect Pass where they're talking about the history of the forward pass and the history of football generally, where there were a lot of dudes dying. Played football. We're talking about, 100 years ago at this point, or 80 years ago at this point. But that happened before. 1971 is probably the most recent incident. Detroit Lions wide receiver, I believe his name was Hughes. God, I wish I had his first name in front of me. I should have. I think it's Daniel Hughes, but I'm not sure. Hughes died on the football field, basically. I think he already had heart damage before that. He had a heart attack earlier, which went undiagnosed, which would not happen probably in the NFL today since they do so many physicals and testing. He had an undiagnosed heart attack, and then with a few minutes left in a game, took a hit, went back to the huddle, went out, maybe even played a play or two, and then just collapsed on the field and was taken off. And they finished the game. They finished that game back in 1971. I'm not saying it's the right thing. I'm just saying they finished the game despite the fact that the other players saw that this dude was not breathing on the field, and took him off. And players were very, very shaken up about this. So I think the NFL definitely made the right decision as far as to cancel the game. Definitely made the right decision, I think, to not play the game. They could have tried to play on Wednesday, but then it wouldn't have just been the Wednesday to Sunday turnaround for some of these teams. It would have been the Wednesday, Sunday to next Sunday playoffs turnaround that would have been very impacted for them. Now, their solution here, I don't know. I mean, the one thing is you're basically giving the Chiefs there's all this talk about who gets home field advantage or not based upon the coin flips and other things. The most significant material thing going on with the seedings here is the home field advantage, is the bye the first week. That's the most material thing that's going on here. Having to play 2 games in the playoffs to get to the Super Bowl versus having to play 3 games in the playoffs. Guess what? I'm going to do some quick math here. It's 50% more games when you go from 2 to 3. That's a big difference. And if you're the number 1 seed, you secure that as the Chiefs. If you get into a situation where you're going to the conference finals, and this is when it's going to be a little bit different, but at least you have an inside window if you're not playing the Bills or one of these other teams. If you win, let's say you win this week, you're not, and the Bills either lose or you're not playing the Bills in the conference championship. You got that home seed locked in. You have the bye locked in. So the Chiefs are a big, big winner as far as this was concerned. For the Bills' perspective, not playing the game from the number 1 seed was like a loss. If they win against the Bengals and they win this week, they would have had the number 1 seed, the Bills, and they don't. So, but now it's the Bengals fans who are a little bit upset about the fact that they're not going to get one of these coin flip situations depending upon where they're going to play. I mean, I get it to a degree. If fans want to be a little bit upset or outraged is probably going too far, or think it's unfair, I get that to a degree also. But what I think that my mentality when it comes to these things, and this also plays into referee calls or other sort of random things where you want to get it right, but you have to realize there's a degree of human error involved in everything. There's a degree of human error involved in refereeing, and I don't think they're going out of their way to be unfair to one particular team. Conspiracy theorists aside, there's a degree of human error and imperfection involved in the solution that the NFL came up with here with how the home field advantage will work here. But I don't think anyone's being malicious. I don't think anyone is favoring one team or another. The outcome may favor one team or another, but I think I'm more comfortable with that than a lot of people are. Maybe I don't look through the lens of fandom, so that helps making comfortable. But also, I think I'm just more comfortable with randomness generally. A few random plays would have gone the other direction. A few random plays go this direction. A few random plays go that direction. This is just another random element that's being thrown into the season. It's not wholly different. I know we think like for referee calls, we have some degree of control and ability to be correct on those. Well, we don't really to get to that level. We can hope for the best. We can develop systems to get us as close as we can, but there's always going to be a degree of randomness. And I think this issue with home field advantage for the Bengals in particular, the fact that they're not going to have the home field advantage with the Bills, if it comes down to that in the next round of the playoffs, hey, it's all part of the random game. It's all part of the random game for what went on here. We can say, we can acknowledge, yeah, it's not fair, and at the same point in time, not kill ourselves about the fairness angle or not when it comes to this. All right, a couple other things that I want to talk about before I get in specifically to the paid, again, P-A-I-D, paid subscriber questions here. And then I'll get to the freeloaders on YouTube after that. Just kidding, people watching it on YouTube. I want to talk Justin Fields and the Bears for a second, because I'm going to write a piece on this. I didn't know what the appropriate timing was. I hinted on the weekend review, the week review Monday piece about the fact that the Bears, and who are starting Nathan Peterman, by the way, so they're serious. They're serious about getting, I mean, Fields may be injured, but they're serious about getting their number 2 pick, at least here. If the Bears lose and the Texans win, remember the Texans are playing the Colts, the Sam Ehlinger Colts. Texans want to lose this game, but, Lovie Smith, he's an old school dude. I don't know what's going to go on here. And after all the stuff we saw with tanking and Brian Flores, I don't think they're going to be slipping Lovie any notes under the door. Like those ransom notes where they just put together random letters from different magazines and newspapers. Maybe they'll slip one of those underneath Lovie Smith's door and be like, lose at all costs or something like that for this one. But so if the Texans win and the Bears lose, the Bears have the number 1 pick in the 2023 draft. So what I said as part of this Bears wrap-up was Fields had a bad throwing game, even with a 60-yard scramble and a 30-yard run, which, he seems to do on a weekly basis, but I'm going to go out on a limb here and say he's not going to get a 60-yard run every single week for the rest of his career. He was very inefficient beyond that, and he's been not any better passing the ball this year than he was last year. Like if you take the scramble rushing contribution out, the 60-yard runs, things like that, there hasn't been improvement in that area. No, I agree with everyone who says the Bears did not put him in a position to be successful this year. Agree. At the same time, like if someone has the best possible surroundings and they're the most efficient quarterback in the NFL, I still think we have to give them some credit because there's a range of outcomes they can have even with the best possible surroundings. So if someone has the worst possible surroundings and then they are the worst passer in the NFL, which Fields is close to being there, efficiency wise, if you strip out these big long runs, well, we have to wonder a little bit about it. So my point in this little blurb, in this write-up was, if the Bears get the number 2 pick, which they're slotted to get, you're looking at, depending on who may fall here, it could be CJ Stroud, it could be Bryce Young. I need to do more research on the other quarterbacks. I know there's Will Levis. God, I don't know how to pronounce his name. I'm looking bad here, but I know he's the other guy who's near the top here. Again, I haven't done my quarterback research yet. I'm not a college football dude, so pardon me. So there's going to be someone there at 2. So my point was, how much do the Bears think and evaluate in that spot? If they get the number 1 pick, how much do they think and evaluate about Bryce Young? And I had a lot of Bears fans that were jumping all over him because people are just stuck in this fixed mentality of this is the way things have been. This is the way things will be. If you draft another quarterback, that means you're giving up on the first quarterback. And I'm going to harken back, as I have many, many times before, to my favorite saying by Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, GM and numbers dude of the Minnesota Vikings, when he said, you have to be thoughtful and intentional. Okay? If you get the number 1 or number 2 pick in the NFL draft in a year where we're saying as of now, we'll see when we get through the draft process, we're saying as of now, there's going to be at least 1, maybe 2, maybe 3 quarterbacks near the top who are worthy of those picks. And your current quarterback, Justin Fields, took a step forward in his overall efficiency this year, running the ball a lot. But he was the number 11 pick. So he wasn't the highest pick coming out, and his passing just hasn't gotten better, really. I know the surroundings are bad. So all I was really saying in this piece was you have to at least think, what should our move be? You have to at least think about evaluating. You have to at least think, what are we going to do? Not reflexively say, this quarterback is not a definite failure. This quarterback has taken some strides in year 2. So therefore, we're not even going to think about drafting someone right near the top. Because let's remember, some teams don't get a chance to draft one of these high quarterbacks for decades. You might not have a chance to draft one of these guys again for decades. You can have, if Fields doesn't work out, you could have 20, 25 years of not finding the right guy at quarterback. Talk to Browns fans until maybe now they have it solved with Deshaun Watson. I don't know. That jersey the Browns had a list of names as long as the night, just keeps on going down there. Talk to Jets fans who now they've had some high picks up there. Hasn't worked out though so far. Maybe Joe Namath you go back to as far as the last franchise quarterback they had. Chad Pennington was pretty good. Maybe if he never had his injuries, he would have been okay. But even he wasn't necessarily a top-notch guy, at least from a physical standpoint. So you got to at least think about it. That's all I'm saying. And some fans don't even want to think about it. They say, if we're going to treat the quarterback position like every other position, if we're going to say, how do we improve here? How do we have competition? How do we not just anoint someone? That's a bad thing in their minds. That's a lack of confidence. That's giving up on someone. It's not. It's making a wise decision. And I know that people think, well, you have to build around the team. I mean, they have $120-$130 million in cap space next year. Even if they draft a quarterback, see where they got in the offseason. They really love that quarterback. I guess they could think about trading Justin Fields, and all you need is 2 bidders to really get a great bid on Justin Fields. Just because you're getting rid of Justin Fields doesn't mean no one will go for him. There's been plenty of situations. Think about the Jets when they were trading away Jamal Adams, who they kind of had to trade away because it became untenable. As long as you have 2 bidders, those bidders bid against each other, and you can get a good price for whoever you're bidding away. And maybe the case is you bring in, let's say, Bryce Young, and you realize, no, what, Justin Fields is better. Let's trade away Bryce Young. I mean, Josh Rosen, after a complete failure of a first season as the number 10 pick, number 9, number 10 pick, I want to say, for the Arizona Cardinals, still got a second round pick a year later after being a failure. Whoever you draft this year won't even be a failure yet. We'll have a higher value than something like that. You can still get something for them. And when you secure that franchise quarterback, I know you say you got to build around. You need to put more pieces out there. One great franchise quarterback allows you to go through cycles of the rest of the roster. Sometimes you have non-quarterback cornerstone pieces who are elite, who you draft, who you can get for a good contract on a second contract, and those also can be pieces. But if you really, really have the elite quarterback, whether it's, look at the greatest ones like Peyton Manning, Drew Brees in recent memory, Aaron Rodgers, Tom Brady, there's a lot of cycling in and out of the rest of the pieces around them. Giving away one cycle or not completely maximizing the non-quarterback contributions during one cycle is not the worst thing if you get the quarterback right. Because then you got another decade, 15 years to build around them going forward. So anyway, people are very upset about that. I don't know if I'll talk about it next week because I want to give it a little time to rest, whether playoffs are the right time or not. Maybe I'll wait till draft season starts to kick in a little bit. We'll see, though, after this week. It might be a good time to do it because we'll know definitively which pick the Bears have. So I might talk about that a little bit there. Okay, the last point that I'm going to talk about before I get to some of the Q&A, the direct Q&A, and this is a derivative of Q&A because it is something that was discussed by subscribers in the comments to an episode that I did with Ted Knutson, the CEO and founder of StatsBomb. Awesome company. They've done soccer data. Now they're doing football data. Ted had done betting before. It's probably the best response I've gotten almost for any episode that I've ever done as far as an interview. I think it's the most downloads I've gotten over the first 24 and 48 hours. So if you haven't checked that out, go back and do so and listen to me talk to Ted. But he had one part talking about culture, and I talked to him about the importance of culture as someone who has worked inside of, at least in a consulting basis, different soccer clubs, football clubs, if you're European, and has now talked to coaches, talked to other people about what this the culture thing that's always out there, the things that cannot be measured. Like, how do you think about that as a data type person? And this is what he told me, and then we'll get into some of this discussion about culture afterwards and some other takeaways that I didn't have a chance to get into in the podcast.
Some stuff definitely matters. Coaches being able to deal with like a happy dressing room versus an unhappy dressing room is a big challenge. Character among your recruits definitely matters. Like if you say you're outside of the sporting context and you have a team that you think is, highly motivated and good character and everybody sort of pulls on the same rope, like that's a big deal for a business too. It's not just a sporting context, but the competitive landscape of sport probably amplifies that a little bit. And so the no assholes policy is one that we strongly believe in, and we've learned it. And I won't say that we did research and in terms of like paper, but we certainly felt that we had a very comfortable understanding of how important that was at the team level when I was at Brentford and Midtjylland, and then since that time. So those bits
we're talking about coaching
strong.
staff or in players here, because I
All
guess
of the above. Players.
Someone will always point out, like, Michael Jordan might be the biggest asshole like on the planet, right? Or Kobe Bryant was probably an asshole, or things like that. So,
but they had extremely high standards that they enforced, and they expected their teammates to enforce that as well. And they were the big enough dogs to be able to do that. So yes, don't be an asshole in that way, but high standards is incredibly important. You can't be lax. And, in some cases, like you will see, many of the most successful people are slightly sociopathic.
So I'm going to talk specifically about the culture thing. So the culture thing is really hard to diagnose because there's no hard evidence of it. I thought it was interesting, though, is also flipping into this asshole policy. I've kind of been on this idea that maybe like the winning isn't everything sort of philosophy needs to have a bigger voice. And one of those things would be not having assholes. I do think it was a little bit, his whole thing about Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan, when I brought those up as examples of guys who were assholes, and undoubtedly assholes, and how they've had success. And his thing is holding teammates to a high standard. So here's my thing when it comes to these guys like Kobe Bryant and Michael Jordan and others. They point to this as being like they're holding other people to this really, really high standard. I don't know if I fully buy that. I think it's more of a self-motivation technique than anything else. I think it's more about them. I think this mentality is how they best motivate themselves more than how they are motivating other people. I think if you look at Jordan, for instance, in his Hall of Fame speech, he mentioned, everyone he's met his entire life, it seemed like, who doubted him, and how he used that for motivation. To be extremely critical of your teammates, in a way, is pointing to another obstacle that you have to overcome, that you have to be that much better because your teammates are not good. It's another way of motivating yourself in a similar sort of way of motivating yourself through the people who are doubting you and things like that. So I don't buy that they're holding people to a higher standard. And again, some people had questions about the culture sort of thing when it comes down to it. And yeah, also the culture things, they do measure themselves on the field or the court or wherever else too. We still do have results to go by. So before saying that an asshole is good or an asshole is bad, I think definitively we know it's bad to have to deal with as a human being. I think it can be bad in some ways on what you have to deal with on the on-court results. And, someone like Kobe, I don't know if he had the greatest on-court results for where he could have been with his talent level that he had there without having the other pieces around him, especially Shaquille O'Neal early in his career. But I do think they're very, very good for motivating themselves. And that's really where the tension is. It's motivating yourself versus potentially motivating your teammates by having this sort of attitude. But anyway, check out more of the interview that I had with Ted. There's a lot more that goes into it, even beyond the culture sort of aspects. All right, let's get into the old questions that we have here. First one is from Max. He says, how much of Jimmy, meaning Jimmy G's EPA goodness do you think would transfer over if he were to end up on a team like the Jets next season? Some of it. For those who haven't seen my adjusted quarterback efficiency numbers, he definitely gets downgraded by yards after the catch and by receiver quality. But the thing is, if he went to the Jets, not on the same level as George Kittle and Deebo Samuel and Brandon Ayuk over there, but they got some dudes. Garrett Wilson looks like a player. Elijah Moore could be a player. Mike LaFleur runs an offense that is similar to what they're doing in San Francisco. And Jimmy gets downgraded. I mean, he doesn't look like a top 5 guy when you move his adjustment down, but he still is in that 10-ish sort of range, 10 to 15 sort of range. So not bad at all. A little bit better, honestly, than how Brock Purdy has looked, who Purdy on an unadjusted basis has been almost as good, but he's fallen quite a bit more once you make those adjustments in there. So I still think Jimmy would be pretty good. Jimmy still be my guy as the top option for the Jets, even over Derek Carr, but he might not be able to stay healthy. So that's an issue there. Again, from Max, what would you have as second on the positional value spectrum after quarterback? I mean, I'd like to say something a little bit controversial. I think wide receiver has really proven itself in its value proposition this season. Rarely had we seen top-notch wide receivers change teams. Wide receivers even got the reputation in the past as being maybe not as valuable because whenever a big free agent would go from one organization to another, you'd see them fall. But the thing was, you just weren't really getting those high-end players. We've finally seen some high-end players in their primes change teams recently. Because of how much some teams are willing to give up for him and teams just generally being willing to trade players more. I say Stephon Diggs is kind of really the biggest one, the first big one. And then after that, A.J. Brown, Tyreek Hill, and so on. And we're seeing success after success after success. Devontae Adams, not team success, but I think player level success. He's been pretty good. He's a little bit on the older side too for these guys. So I think wide receivers taking a step up. I think I'm still going to go, though, with more of the NFL answer of the edge rusher because, number one, I'm going to lean a little bit just towards NFL contracts. They get paid the second most for a reason. I'm going to lean on their independence in evaluation. They're not as nearly as dependent as a wide receiver is dependent on a quarterback. A edge rusher is really dependent upon the quality of the blocking that they face, but you can isolate at least someone. I know there's chipping. I know there's other techniques to hedge a little bit against an edge rusher, but it's as isolated as you can get. So therefore you have more confidence paying that player more, even if you don't know they're necessarily as valuable. So I think the edge rusher is still there, although wide receiver is like a sneaky one in the past, which has now got a lot more value because of what we've seen with these guys changing teams and just like changing the whole dynamic and being that good on their new teams. Okay, this is from Garrett. It says the last 4 MVP winners have led the NFL in QBR. The current favorite also has the lead. Conventional wisdom says that the voters don't care about advanced stats. But is this still true? Okay, so I would say it's not like an issue of is it still true or not? It's just always been true. Not that they care about advanced stats, but that advanced stats match much more of what we think right? Like the EPA per play. If you look at EPA per play over the last several years, other than Cam Newton in his MVP campaign, where he would have been, I think, 6th or 7th in EPA per play, that he's really the only one who doesn't fall really outside of 1st or 2nd in EPA per play who wins MVP. Most of the time it's 1st. It really matches up a lot. You go back further and further and further, there are very few guys who are that far outside. Even if you look at adjusted net yards per attempt, it's always a top guy who's winning MVP. There are a few seasons where it hasn't been the case. I think if we're going back far enough, John Elway season, John Elway was kind of on the same level. Randall Cunningham had like MVP votes and some serious MVP campaign in a year where he really wasn't that high on the efficiency, mostly because of his sacks that he was taking. But generally, it's kind of always been the case. And that's why I think it's funny that people complain about EPA per play and they say, oh, it's a team stat. It's quote unquote a team stat. Every stat's a team stat. And if anything, it really has matched up very, very well. And again, this year, Mahomes is probably going to win the MVP and he's going to be the leader in EPA per play. And it really does capture a lot of the value of the quarterback, a value that we understand intuitively. Even if people want to say these advanced stats are for nerds only, go watch the film. Hey, it seems to match up pretty well generally with that. That's why we want to take insights from it. It's not perfect for every player, but that's why we want to take insights from it. Okay, this is from Cole to Cole question here. If you were the GM of the Ravens, how would you approach Lamar's contract? It's a great question. I actually mentioned Lamar in contrast to Justin Fields, and I was a little bit surprised when I said Lamar had shown so much more as a passer his first 2 seasons than Justin Fields, that I had people complaining about that. People are like, oh, Fields is a better passer. I mean, maybe like optically, maybe like aesthetically, he's a better passer. But Lamar Jackson, blew the doors off passing efficiency in his second season when he won the MVP. I mean, he was one of the most efficient passers in the NFL. Justin Fields is like the least efficient passer in the NFL. So that's a little bit of a difference. Yeah, Lamar had some help. He had a pretty good offensive line. But still, I think people are a little too concerned about the aesthetics or arm talent and that sort of stuff when it comes to efficiency or not. But anyway, let's get to Lamar and his contract. This is a tough one. I do think there's something to be said for downweighting rushing value in a long-term contract, because there's less stability in certain types of passing, like yards after catch passing, but there's also less stability when it comes to big runs. Now, Lamar Jackson is not a big run quarterback, though. Like the big runs that we've seen from Justin Fields this year, I think can be downweighted quite a bit. We saw some big, important runs from Mitch Trubisky in his second season, which made him look decent by EPA per play. I downweight that a little bit. Daniel Jones this season, gone way up in rushing value. He's doing it on a little bit more of a regularized basis than he was doing in the past, but how much do we pay for that? Eventually, they're going to get older. And when you re-sign them to a second contract, you're not just re-signing them to that second contract. You're almost committing to that player until they just play themselves out of you wanting them anymore. The NFL quarterback contract is the number one place to go if you need to restructure and get cap space, because it's the biggest contract. And it's a player that you can have the most reasonable confidence will still be good, still be valuable a number of years down the road. So that becomes a lever to a lot of teams for restructuring. So when you sign the quarterback to the second contract, sometimes you get out of it. Goff might have actually already been restructured once before they got rid of him. The Carson Wentz, the others, it's possible if very quickly you play yourself out. If you don't, and you have a good team that's competing and doesn't, blow up like the Eagles did, you're probably just going to restructure that quarterback and bring him back again. So you do have to think pretty hard about the second contract. I like Lamar, though. But from what we've heard, if he does have some sort of hang up about a fully guaranteed contract, that's going to be a problem, because the fully guaranteed contract is an anomaly. It's a free agent Deshaun Watson situation. Lamar Jackson's not a free agent. It's not going to happen, especially not with how much he's running the ball. And he's had injuries the last couple of years. And he wasn't super efficient last year. He's pretty good this year on some big plays to Rashad Bateman and others. And some big runs early in the season. I don't know. It's a tough one. I do think if you're the Ravens, though, you just have to stick to your guns and say, we're not offering him a mid-level contract. We're not offering him a severely discounted contract, but we're not going to go way above a certain number just because the Cardinals are giving a ton of money and they're going to make top of the market contract to Kyler Murray. It doesn't mean you have to go way above that. It's just become a tougher and tougher situation with such good team-friendly contracts that went to Patrick Mahomes and then Josh Allen. The 10-year and 6-year deals at numbers which at the time were new highs, but have now been surpassed. And you still have these long tails on these contracts. Makes things very, very difficult. So it all depends on what Lamar's negotiation tactics are. And hey, if you need to franchise them, franchise them. So I would say more teams need to kind of just stick to their guns here. Offer him a big money contract. Offer him a number that's right there with the best contracts in the NFL. Maybe try to skimp a little bit on the guarantees, though, which it doesn't seem like he wants. It seems like he wants the fully guaranteed. So that's going to make things difficult. We just really do not have a good window to these negotiations, which can be very important for trying to determine, what these teams are doing and what their actual strategy is versus what's getting leaked to Schefter and others that ends up getting reported to us. Okay. Another contract here, another quarterback contract discussion on Daniel Jones. So I wrote about Daniel Jones in the adjusted quarterback efficiency piece this week. He is 7th, I believe, in the NFL in adjusted quarterback efficiency on a per play basis, 5th overall because he's a pretty high volume in a year where some guys have missed some time. So John asks, he says, when you say you'd be willing to give Jones a mid-level QB contract, I'm curious how you define that. I was just listening to the Over the Cap podcast. Great listen, by the way, Jason Fitzgerald. He was lamenting, and I heard the same one, that such a thing should exist, but doesn't. The average annual value jumps from high 7 figures for the temporary starters like Mariota and Trubisky to 14 for Winston, to 25 for Brady, and 29 for Tannehill. Tannehill has like a $35 million cap hit this year. Are you suggesting the Giants offer something like the Winston contract and hold firm? I can't imagine that would work. I agree. I don't think that would work. I would guess $30 million a year seems like a target price for a mid-level starter, but that is also pretty close to the bottom range for a multi-year starter contracts and most contracts given. Blah, 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 blah. Would you go mid-30s or set a ceiling around $25 million? No, I wouldn't set a ceiling around $25 million. I think, okay, so this was all about the Derek Carr contract, the discussion that Jason Fitzgerald was having. And it was almost as if Derek Carr signed his own ticket out of town for me when he signed that contract, because it was a lower cap hit initially, and then it was going to bump up to $35 million in 2023. The probability, no matter how well Carr played, and I guess it was an upside probability with Devontae Adams coming in, all that stuff, but really the probability that he was going to be a quarterback you could justify at $35 million a year next year at the beginning of this season was pretty low. I know some people were putting him in a top 12 quarterback. That was ambitious, in my opinion, coming into the season. So I would say the Carr contract is potentially a model for Daniel Jones, but the problem is it just leaves a very high probability that you're going to cut him next season, because is he really going to become a $35 million a year type of quarterback, even if you're only paying him 20-something million this season? But it's a possibility. Maybe you can get him lower than Daniel Jones. I mean, we're talking about a 4th-year breakout here where there wasn't a ton of enthusiasm around him. I know he was the number 6 overall pick in the draft, so that's pretty high. But he was never really viewed that way, right? He was never viewed the same way Josh Allen was viewed, even though Allen was a number 7 draft pick. Never viewed the same way Patrick Mahomes was viewed. Patrick Mahomes was the 10th overall draft pick. Deshaun Watson was the 12th overall draft pick. Not on the same level as those guys. was a weird draft, and the Giants, took a shot on him. But he doesn't have a lot of surrounding talent here, and he is starting to run a bit more, and he has taken his turnovers down. So from the Giants' perspective, you try to sign him to a deal where you're getting some sort of value over what you believe you can sign him to next year if he has a good year on the franchise tag. Think about how much you're going to have to pay him on the franchise tag. Think about the range of outcomes. Think about what he will cost thereafter. That would be the framework that I would be dealing with. Everything is against an opportunity cost. Everything is against the next best option. Is your next best option to blow it up and start over? I don't know. It's just tough. Would I look at quarterbacks in the draft? Yeah, sure. I mean, all these teams. Remember, the Kansas City Chiefs had Alex Smith. Great year for Alex Smith. Best year of his career, 2017, with Patrick Mahomes there. They moved up before that, even though Alex Smith had been pretty solid, because they could. Unfortunately, the Giants right now are at the 23rd pick right now. So that's going to be tough. That is kind of where it's kind of a similar range, I think, to where Kansas City moved up to get up to 10. So maybe it's possible. So I would still look at that. I would just keep your options open. You have a ton of cap space. Don't be afraid to use the franchise tag. And don't be afraid to think about the franchise tag as the opportunity cost and how much you should sign up to. Don't just go and sign him to $35 million a year, though. That would be insane. I mean, if you want to sign him to something where there's going to be a bump up and you can maybe restructure in a year or two, maybe. But then you got a very long window on Daniel Jones as your quarterback, and I still don't think we're quite there yet where we can feel comfortable about that. So stick to your guns. Franchise tag is the flexibility you get from that. Never a bad situation. If he plays his ass off next year on the tag, hey, maybe you tip your cap and then you break out the pocketbook at that point. I think it's probably the best way to go. And the thing with Jason Fitzgerald and his rant, I agree with him and I disagree with him. I still think like starting over at quarterback is a little too much for a lot of teams that just want to be able to compete and not have a decade of darkness. And I also think that saying you're never going to compete with Patrick Mahomes and the Chiefs, or you're never going to compete with, this is a big point that Jason was making, Josh Allen and the Bills because of those contracts that they have. And so that's why you can't do these other deals. Well, that's gone. Like they signed those team-friendly deals. They signed them. Just because those quarterbacks gave their teams a very friendly contract. I mean, you got to think about it, how you can compete, but sometimes people do this. They like look at the best possible deal a team got for trading someone, and they say, like, they have that as being like the benchmark for what you should get in a trade. It's like, no, that's not the benchmark for what you should get in a trade. Or the opposite way. They look at like some player who got traded away for way too little, and they say, this is like our benchmark. No, like Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen are not necessarily benchmarks for what you can expect to do going forward. Great deals for the Chiefs and Bills, though. But you still have to think about, independent of that, you have to think about how can I best build my team in the circumstance that I'm in, not only looking at it through the lens of having to replicate these great deals that we saw other places. You'd love to, but you can't necessarily do it. All right. Okay, I already talked about Fields. That's the last question here. This is another interesting one. Connor. Did Connor already talk with Connor? I might have already had one from Connor on here. Actually, no, he was talking about the culture one. Connor, frequent commenter. Tip of the cap to you, my friend. Do you think it's possible to sustain high-end success with a mid-tier quarterback without just hoping you can build an elite roster around them, aka optimize strategy analytically somehow? So here's what I would say. Yes, I think it's possible to have sustainable success, but you got to get the ball rolling. So you're probably going to need a little bit of luck to get the ball rolling, but once you get the ball rolling, you have to make good decisions on getting rid of players, earning comp picks, investing it back in, and then every single time you have a decision, whether it's a trade, which doesn't happen quite as often, whether it's a draft pick, whether it's a free agent signing, whether it's getting a compensatory pick or not, whether it's trading up and down in the draft, you want to gain some sort of incremental value. If you can gain slices of incremental value, it's not always going to work, right? The results are not going to be. I'm talking about like process-based incremental value on all these different moves. Because often we lament, like, let's say the Raiders and the Derek Carr contract for what's going on, but they've made like a shit ton of other mistakes. They're sometimes even more egregious. So if you can get the incremental benefits on all these other moves, I do believe you can have sustained success even outside of the quarterback, as long as you're getting, mid-tier sort of quarterback numbers. Now, you don't want to be paying that quarterback $50 million a year, but you can still do pretty well. I mean, the Vikings are probably another example where I don't think they're good this year, but even in past years where Kirk Cousins was playing better, people would talk about the Kirk Cousins contract over and over and over again. But their real problem is they weren't willing to let a bunch of other players go that they should have. They kept on paying them top money, and they made bigger mistakes in those areas. But everyone would concentrate on the Kirk Cousins contract. So just remember that. You can picking up nickels and dimes along the way in value will eventually build up a piggy bank big enough to be able to float the team and at least put you in a chance of making the playoffs and having a chance to win the Super Bowl, which you're trying to maximize. And we can't always say we're going to have the top 5 or 6 quarterbacks in the NFL in order to do so. All right, let's get to the YouTube freeloaders here. Are you familiar with Christian Eriksen's situation during last soccer's Euros? Yes, I am. It's a little bit different, though. It's not like the exact commotio cordis situation here with a hit to the chest. But there's been a few soccer players who have had basically heart attacks on the pitch, as they would say. Christian Eriksen being one of them. Similar situation, had to be shocked back, and I believe he's playing right now with a pacemaker or something like that. He's playing professional soccer as we speak. And there's been a few other guys who are not as fortunate. One suffering permanent brain damage there's been in soccer. Another because he did not get resuscitated quickly enough. Another I don't think ever came back. What else we got here? Okay, Nathan Rourke put up an elite quarterback season in the CFL at age 24. Led the league in EPA and CPOE. God, CFL, EPA. We're getting niche here. We're getting very niche here. How would you approach him if you were an NFL GM and he would only sign for a roster spot? I remember you talking about steals being rare as the entire market must fail. His CFL numbers are crazy, though, and he's scored himself a couple of NFL workouts. I mean, this sounds interesting. CFL, we have a little bit of difference as far as the spread open nature. It's a wider field. It's a longer end zone for sure. Is it a longer field or not? Dr. Tough Guy here with the question. Maybe you can help me out on whether or not it's a longer field or not. It's definitely wider. You have players who are in motion. So it's a little bit of a different game, more of a wide open game. We don't have a lot to go on from CFL, NFL success. I mean, I guess Warren Moon, Doug Flutie are a couple of guys who just probably weren't given the proper chance to thrive in the NFL initially. And then they had to eventually, Dr. Tough Guy says here, big ass end zone. Yeah, it's a big ass end zone. Jeff Garcia, that's another good one. It's the Sir Mix-a-Lot of end zones there for the CFL. It's interesting, but I think you got to work these guys out. This is when I wish that teams were more willing, though, to just put guys in, whether it's preseason or if you're a team that is out of kind of contention, bring guys in and have them play. I think that'd be very interesting. I mean, I'm not totally against it. I do think on-field play level action is very, very important. The problem is we just have not seen a lot of CFL success. You mentioned a few guys here, which I think are good. I mean, Jeff Garcia would be a perfect example of a guy who was not feted coming out of college, who proved himself there. And, he was in my, he was in the top 50 for my QB GOAT series because of how much value he also added on the ground. I see it says here that Nathan Rourke has scored a couple touchdowns himself. Or scored a couple NFL workouts. Can he move? Can Nathan Rourke move? Maybe let me know, Dr. Tough Guy. If so, I would definitely be interested in that. Question from Trevor here. Have you back tested AQE, this adjusted quarterback efficiency, to see how stable it is over time? I have not, because unfortunately, I don't have charting data going back far enough now. I only have the charting data that I'm using now from FTN data, which goes back to 2021. So I only have a year of data. What I have found, and this is interesting, actually, it was one of the readers found this. I didn't even find this, that they took the data that I have available for paid subscribers in a Google sheet. They pulled it out. They looked at the R squared, the correlations between adjusted quarterback efficiency versus unadjusted quarterback efficiency and PFF grades, and they found a stronger correlation, which makes sense because it's using charting data there. So I do know that PFF grading is a little bit more stable year over year. So for the fact that AQE, adjusted quarterback efficiency, is more similar to PFF grading than unadjusted quarterback efficiency would make me think that it would have more stability, but unfortunately do not have enough history to do that. Okay, Mustafa Jones here. I think I've seen you around on Twitter. Good to see you on these streets here. Could a trade for Jordan Love be an option for the Jets this offseason? Has backed up Aaron Rodgers in a similar offense for a few seasons and could be a more intriguing gamble than another rookie QB. And what could that trade look like? Yeah. I don't know. I'm not that big on Jordan Love. I just feel like there's probably a better opportunity with someone who has shown a little bit more success in limited NFL playing time, who wasn't a first round pick. Because I just feel like with Love, if you're going to trade for him, maybe they're still holding out some hope. So here were the warning signs for Love. He was seen as being a project sort of guy. I don't think that matters because, like, Patrick Mahomes is seen being a project guy. Everyone who thinks they know who's a project and who's not a project coming into the NFL, it totally flips on its head once they get into the NFL. But he was not only seen as being a project. In his rookie year, he was not active the entire season. So he was not the backup. They were not even willing to make him the backup quarterback his entire rookie season. Came in the limited times that he's come in. I think he played a half against the Lions. He stunk. He played the whole game against the Kansas City Chiefs last year. He stunk. He played a little bit this year when he came in for Rodgers, and that's when people got a little excited. Say, hey, look, he can make some big plays. In garbage time-ish sort of situation. I don't know. I just wonder what the price would be. That's the problem. When you talk about getting a guy who's already gone through 3 NFL seasons, his entire rookie contract is almost exhausted. This also goes back to Justin Fields for a second. Sorry, I'm going back to Fields here. But another reason for maybe drafting a quarterback and trading Fields is you get the full 4-year/5-year for a first-year quarterback rookie contract window to build up your team, which is still going to take another year or two. Whereas with Fields, you're already 2 years into it. With Love, you're already in year 4 now. You're already making decisions about a 5th-year option now, like when Darnold was traded for. I don't know. I don't think so. I mean, if the Packers are willing to give him away for something cheap, like a second-round pick, I'm not sure I'm that happy about. 3rd-round pick? No way. You're just not going to get him for a 3rd-round pick, I don't think. I don't know if people value him, but it's an interesting idea. I look at it. I'm not allergic to anything. My assumption is, though, that it's just not going to work out. Oh, Dr. Tough Guy is back to us. Yes, 304 yards rushing in 8 games last year for Rourke. Okay, it's my new guy. I have Skylar Thompson, who we may see this year, is one of my guys. Nathan Rourke, come to the NFL. You can be one of my guys also. Okay, everybody. Appreciate so much everyone tuning in, the thoughtful questions here. The best commenters, the best subscribers on the planet for my Substack, unexpectedpoints.substack.com. I love everyone showing the love there, subscribing, giving me feedback. It's been such a good move here. And I know, getting laid off from PFF was the thing, but this is kind of what I want to be doing anyway. So I appreciate everyone for tuning in here. This will hit the podcast streets. I'll be back next week with an interview podcast with a couple of young dudes from the Take the Points podcast, Arun Menon and Tej Seth, who is now a newly hired data scientist over at Sumer Sports, where Eric Eager, formerly of PFF, runs things over there. So I'll get to talk to him about that and everything that they're doing with their podcast there. A couple of young bucks. I'll get to do, some old man energy, a little back in my day energy with these young guys. But I love seeing the young guys that are doing such great things out there. with this growing field of analytics. Otherwise, everyone, I'll be talking at all of you next week. Again, drop comments to this episode either on YouTube or preferably when I drop it in Substack, and I will answer those questions next week. Continue to add any comments that you may want, and I will continue to answer them next week. Until then, I'll be talking at all of you then. Thanks so much. Peace out.